They called her their first success, not their daughter, not their blood, just a success story, something to showcase between speeches and champagne. On the night of the Whitmore Foundation's 60th anniversary gala, Evelyn Grace stood quietly at the back of the ballroom, her presence deliberately softened by the shadows. The room sparkled chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, laughter floated over crystal glasses, and the kind of curated music you only hear at events where power pretends to be benevolence. Everyone here knew the name Whitmore. Few remembered Evelyn. Fewer still remembered why they should. She smoothed the hem of her black dress and exhaled, not nervously, not anymore, but like someone who'd rehearsed how to disappear in plain sight. A waiter passed by, offering her champagne. She declined. They always forgot she didn't drink. In the center of the ballroom was a marble podium, gilded with the words, "A Legacy of Uplift." And surrounding it, a sea of people, donors, Ivy League alumni, politicians in polished shoes, all buzzing about the legacy of the Whitmore family. A legacy Evelyn had once been asked to smile for, to embody, but never to question. She had arrived alone, no fanfare, no announcement. Her name wasn't on the family's table, no surprise. Instead, she'd been seated near the back, at a table marked "Distinguished Guests," sandwiched between a PR assistant and a freshman senator's niece, close enough to be seen, far enough to stay silent. And that was the point, wasn't it? For Evelyn Grace to remain just visible enough to prove their goodness but never visible enough to demand recognition. When she was 10, she'd stood in the same ballroom wearing an oversized blazer and holding a certificate. Her shoes didn't fit. Her smile was small, her eyes already too old. The photographer had snapped a photo that day, the same one they still used in brochures, but when the glossy print arrived, her image had been cropped to fit the frame better, neater, whiter. She was the face of a foundation that refused to show her face. Evelyn wasn't bitter, not exactly. Bitterness suggested surprise. She had learned very early not to expect more than what was offered: a room in the back of the house, a second-hand uniform for school, praise when it suited the narrative and silence when it didn't. The Whitmores were old money, the kind of family whose name appeared on hospitals and halls of fame. Harold Whitmore, the patriarch, had given the foundation its name. His wife, Cecilia, ran the board like a general in pearls. Their sons, Bennett and Gregory, had been raised to inherit not just wealth, but the illusion of moral superiority. And Evelyn? Evelyn was the child from nowhere taken in after her mother died, publicly described as a gifted scholarship recipient. Privately, she was the girl who slept in the guest room with a mattress wrapped in plastic and a closet filled with coats that weren't hers. They had called her Evelyn Grace, like bestowing a name made up for the loss of a past. She remembered the first time she realized she wasn't really part of the family. It was subtle. A family portrait day. Everyone in coordinated navy and ivory. Evelyn was given a cream sweater 2 sizes too big. She stood between the brothers, unsure where to place her hands. Later, when the framed photo appeared on the wall, she wasn't in it. Cecilia had smiled when asked, "It just didn't come out right, darling. We'll do another next year." They never did. Still, Evelyn excelled. She learned early that performance was survival. Her grades were perfect. Her posture, impeccable. She said thank you, even when the compliments stung. "She's so well-spoken," guests would remark, as if surprised that grace could come from a girl like her. But inside, Evelyn was gathering weight. Not the weight of resentment but of memory. Every slight, every omission, every time she had been introduced not as family but as the girl we helped. It all settled in her bones. Tonight, as she sat in the shadow of a celebration she was never truly part of, that weight shifted, not with rage, but with clarity. The host took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to share this night with many extraordinary people, but one in particular, the very first scholar of the Whitmore Foundation. A living testament to what education and opportunity can accomplish, Miss Evelyn Grace." A round of applause followed, soft, rehearsed, and polite. Evelyn stood. The spotlight found her. Cameras turned. She smiled, briefly, and then sat back down. That was all they expected. Her image, her silence, her proof of their goodness. But tonight, she had brought something else. In her purse was a letter, folded, yellowed, sealed in an envelope addressed in delicate, trembling handwriting. She hadn't told anyone she had it. Not even Harold, the only member of the household who had ever whispered, "Are you okay?" instead of telling her to smile. The letter had come to her just days ago, passed to her in secret by the old groundskeeper. "He wanted you to have this," the man had said, placing it in her hand like it weighed the world. And maybe it did. Because on the back of that envelope, just beneath the seal was written, "For Evelyn, my daughter." When Evelyn returned to her seat, the applause had already faded. Conversation picked back up, faint, forced, as if her brief presence under the spotlight was a line item now checked off. The senator's niece beside her smiled vaguely, murmured, "Well done," like Evelyn had performed a pleasant trick. She smiled back. That same tight, curated smile she'd mastered over 2 decades. The one that said, "I know I'm not welcome, But I'm not leaving either. A fresh tray of champagne glasses glided past. Someone toasted to 60 years of impact. Laughter followed. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. Inside her purse, the letter pressed against her thigh like a heartbeat. Cecilia Whitmore took the stage next, regal in a navy silk gown, diamonds dripping from her ears like declarations. Her voice was clear, trained the kind that made you feel like your nod was being graded. "It is our joy, our privilege," Cecilia began, "to have guided so many bright lives toward success. Evelyn is one such example." Evelyn didn't flinch. Not even as the room turned toward her again with faint smiles and camera flashes. Cecilia's words rang out like gospel. "She came to us with nothing," she continued, "and through discipline and our shared values, she has become someone we are all proud to know." The phrasing was deliberate. Nothing, become, know. Not love, not raise, not belong. A polite chuckle spread across the room like spilled syrup, sweet, sticky, difficult to clean. Then, without pause, Cecilia added, "And we do hope her words tonight inspire a new generation of scholars." Of course, 5 minutes was more than generous. Laughter erupted this time. Real. Cruel. It caught Evelyn off guard, not for the insult, but because it felt rehearsed. Pre-approved. Cecilia had dressed the jab in pearls and handed it out like dessert. Evelyn didn't laugh. She didn't blink. But something in her spine clicked. Bennett, the older son, stood now, taking the mic with the ease of a man born into spotlights. "Mother always says a legacy is only as strong as its stories," he grinned, glancing toward Evelyn. "And Evelyn's story reminds us how powerful it is to give back." He let the phrase hang. Give back, as if she were a debt paid in full, as if she had been loaned her own life. People clapped again, louder this time. Evelyn felt none of it. Her eyes scanned the room, but no one met her gaze. Not even Gregory, the younger brother, who years ago had once whispered to her about dreams in college and how he wished they were really siblings. He avoided her now like her truth was contagious. It hit her like cold water. They weren't celebrating her. They were celebrating ownership. She was the before and after photo in their portfolio, the face of their curated generosity. Evelyn's phone buzzed silently in her bag. A text. It was from Harold, the old groundskeeper. "You don't have to stay until the end. Just know I see you." She stared at the words, her chest tightening not from sadness, but from restraint. She remembered Harold letting her help trim the hedges once, just so she could get out of the guest room on Sundays. He had given her earplugs when the ballroom hosted midnight fundraisers, taught her how to fix a leaky faucet because a girl who waits to be rescued never learns to build a boat. The memory lit something inside her. She looked again at the purse. The letter. Evelyn rose from her chair, slowly. People barely noticed. One woman glanced up but assumed she was going to the restroom. She wasn't. Her heels clicked softly against the marble, tracing a slow arc around the tables, through the chandelier-lit crowd, past faces that once posed beside her in family newsletters but never sat next to her at dinner. She found herself in the East Corridor, the Hall of Portraits. Every Whitmore was there, Harold and Cecilia on their wedding day, Bennett at his Harvard graduation, Gregory sailing solo off Nantucket. Their smiles, their triumphs, framed in gold leaf. She wasn't in a single one. She stood still, arms crossed, breath steady. In the hush of the hallway, something in her loosened. Not grief, not anger, something deeper. She had once begged to be seen. Now, she was done asking. She returned to the ballroom, just as the final toast was beginning. Glasses raised, laughter swelled, cameras clicked. And now, the MC announced, "To close out this unforgettable evening, we invite back to the stage our first scholar, Evelyn Grace, for a few final words." Evelyn paused mid-step. That wasn't the plan. They weren't supposed to call her again. Not twice, not unscripted. But something in her gut told her. They expected another thank you, a neat little bow to wrap up their narrative. What they didn't know, what they could never have guessed, was that this time, she had come with her own ending. She walked to the stage with the letter pressed against her palm. Each step felt like a reckoning. Cecilia sat frozen at the family table, wine glass halfway to her lips. Bennett's smile faltered. Gregory looked down. And Evelyn? She smiled just once. Not politely, but like someone who had waited 20 years for this. The spotlight followed her as she crossed the polished floor. But for once, Evelyn didn't flinch under its heat. It was quiet in the ballroom, not polite quiet, but stunned, held breath, pin-drop quiet, the kind that arrives when power senses it's about to be confronted. She stepped behind the podium. No note cards, no script. Just the small envelope in her hand, pale yellow, edges curled, addressed in trembling ink. "For Evelyn, my daughter." The room waited. She let them. "I wasn't planning to speak again tonight," Evelyn began softly, voice steady but low, like she wanted the silence to lean in. "But I found something. Something I wasn't meant to find, but that found me anyway." She looked out over the sea of sequin gowns and tailored tuxedos, faces she knew, faces that had smiled at her like she was a portrait, hung for decoration. "I'd like to read a letter," she said, Written by the man this foundation is named after. Someone gasped. A wine glass tilted, caught mid-spill. Cecilia shifted in her seat. Evelyn unfolded the paper slowly, carefully. She didn't rush. She knew how to handle fragile things. "My dearest Evelyn," she read aloud, "if you're reading this, then I've failed twice. Once by staying silent, and again by not finding the courage to face you." A fork dropped somewhere near the front. "I was a coward," the letter continued. "I let the world tell me who I was allowed to love, and in doing so, I erased you." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wind tearing through lace. "You were not just a girl we helped," Evelyn read, her voice gaining weight. "You were not a project. You were my daughter." At the family table, Bennett stiffened. Gregory's head sank, and Cecilia was frozen in place, her glass trembling slightly, red wine catching the light like blood in crystal. Evelyn didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She was speaking to something deeper than pride. The letter unfolded further. "Your mother," she read, "was the most extraordinary woman I ever knew. Brilliant, fearless. And I was ashamed of how little I fought for either of you." A woman near the back clutched her chest. Somewhere, a man whispered, "Oh my God." "I brought you into our home," Evelyn continued, "not with love, but with terms, conditions. And I let them tell the world you were a symbol, not a child." The words sliced through the room like violin strings pulled too tight. She glanced up then, locking eyes with no one and everyone. "I let them treat you like proof of their generosity," she read, "when you were proof of my blood." For a beat, no one moved, not even the servers. The music had long since stopped. Evelyn folded the letter, once, twice. She held it close to her chest. And then she said, "For 20 years, I've lived inside someone else's version of my life. I was praised when I stayed quiet, elevated when I performed, invisible when I questioned." Her voice never cracked, but the power behind it did. "You all know me as their first success story," she said, turning gently to the crowd. "But tonight, I need you to know me as something else, their daughter, their secret, their shame." A murmur stirred, uneasy and raw. "I didn't read this for revenge," Evelyn said. "I read it because stories don't heal in silence, and because little girls who grow up in guest rooms deserve to be remembered not as someone's project, but as someone's child." Cecilia stood, sudden and stiff. "You could have come to us privately," she said, voice brittle. Evelyn didn't even blink. "I did," she replied. "For 20 years. The room exhaled a breath no one realized they'd been holding. "I was never looking to ruin a legacy," she said. "I was simply trying to find my place inside it, and I won't be written out again." And with that, she stepped back from the podium. No bow. No smile. No need. She descended the stairs like she was walking through history and rewriting every line with each footstep. Eyes followed her, not out of pity but out of reckoning. She passed Bennett. He looked away. She passed Gregory. His eyes were rimmed with something like regret. She passed Cecilia, still clutching the wine glass like it was the last thing anchoring her to control. And Evelyn? She just kept walking. Because for the first time in her life, the silence belonged to her. Evelyn didn't look back. Not when the doors to the ballroom closed behind her. Not when the stunned silence rippled through the room like thunder after lightning. And not when the Whitmores, still frozen at their table, sat marinating in the discomfort of a truth they had kept buried for 2 decades. She stepped into the lobby, where the gold-leaf ceilings seemed less intimidating now, the chandeliers less radiant, the marble less pristine. It was just a hotel, just walls, just space. Not a stage anymore. Outside, the air hit her skin like a balm, cool, real, uncurated. She paused on the steps. The city hummed around her, indifferent but honest. A doorman opened the car door, but Evelyn didn't move. Behind her, the ballroom lights still flickered. She turned one last time. Inside, the guests were beginning to stir. Conversations had restarted, tentative, fractured, some hushed with fear, others electrified by the thrill of scandal. No one quite knew what to say. Some glanced at Cecilia for cues, but she gave none. She sat, unmoving, lips drawn into a line so tight it seemed carved in stone. Gregory had his head in his hands. Bennett was already on his phone, typing furiously. And Harold, quiet Harold, stood at the back of the room, his cap in his hand. A single nod passed from across the marble floor. That was all Evelyn needed. He had always seen her, even when no one else did. One reporter, quick on instinct, slipped into the lobby with phone in hand, whispering urgently into a mic. Yes, confirmed on record, biological daughter, handwritten confession. The machine had already begun to move. By morning, headlines would say, "Whitmore legacy shaken by secret daughter's revelation. Letter exposes decades of deception. I am not your charity, I am your legacy." Viral speech rocks, philanthropy world. But Evelyn wasn't reading those headlines. She wasn't refreshing feeds or checking hashtags. She didn't need to watch the empire twitch. She'd already taken back what mattered, her voice, her name, her place. The car door closed behind her with a soft, final click. As the vehicle pulled away from the hotel curb, she didn't glance back. That building, the ballroom, the speeches, the curated smile set could keep its legacy. She had reclaimed her truth. At a red light, she reached into her purse and pulled the letter out again. Not to reread it, just to hold it. She traced her fingers along the word, daughter. She whispered, too late, but true. She returned to the Airbnb that night, far from the Whitmore estate, far from curated narratives. The apartment was small, unadorned. But for the first time in years, Evelyn felt something she hadn't dared name before. Peace. She stood by the window, watching lights flicker across the skyline. In her mind, her mother's voice came back not as an echo of grief, but as warmth. Brushing her hair, humming softly. You are not furniture, Evelyn. You are a flame. The next morning, she awoke to a dozen missed calls, 3 interview requests, 2 voicemails from Bennett, and 1 text from Gregory. I should have stood up. I see that now. If you ever want to talk, I'll listen. She didn't respond. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some silences don't need to be broken. Some aren't revenge. They're protection. Later that day, Harold called. His voice was soft, proud. You lit a fire in that room, girl, he said, and they'll never put it out. Evelyn smiled. Not because she wanted to be remembered for setting something on fire, but because she had finally stepped out of the ashes. By evening, think pieces began to appear. Activists and scholars cited her words. Foundations scrambled to review their optics. Donors withdrew. A board member resigned. The Whitmore brand, once untouchable, had cracked. But Evelyn didn't celebrate that. She didn't post victory quotes or gloat in viral fame. She just took a long walk through the park, breathing in every leaf, every child's laughter, every unfiltered moment. For the first time in her life, she wasn't performing. She was simply being. Weeks later, she gave one interview. On her terms. Sitting across from a quiet, respectful journalist, she said only this. For a long time, I was asked to be grateful, but gratitude should never be demanded like rent. What I gave them wasn't a smile, it was silence, and I've paid enough. The clip was viewed over 3 million times. People wrote letters. Some from girls in foster care. Some from scholars tired of being trophies. Some from women who had never been called daughter by the people who should have known better. Evelyn read every one. And then, one evening, she packed a box not of ribbons or awards but of books, notes, letters, and the one thing she now owned fully, her story. She was launching a fellowship, not in her father's name, not under the Whitmore crest, but in her mother's, the Grace Initiative. For students with voices that don't fit neat narratives. For children who grew up in guest rooms. For those erased from portraits but never from truth. In the press release, there was no mention of the Whitmores. There was just one quote. You don't need a frame to prove you belong. And so Evelyn Grace became more than a scandal, more than a symbol. She became the author of her own legacy.